So today what we're going to talk about is, guys, Ian, turn around. So we're going to start with, talk a little bit about factors that influence how populations grow. We'll talk a little bit about energy flow through ecosystems and relate back to sort of the things we talked about at the beginning of class. So one thing that ecologists study is called population dynamics. There's a field of ecology, population ecology, where this study is of how populations grow, how they compete with each other, how they influence each other. So when you're studying population dynamics, the two types of factors that might influence how a population grows are called density dependent and independent factors. Hello? Sure. Yeah. All right, so density dependent factors are those that depend on how concentrated the population is. So if you have a lot of individuals in a given area, then certain factors come into play. So things like competition for resources. When you have many individuals in a given area, they're going to be competing for the resources that they need. Things like food, light, nutrients. Also, factors like disease become important. The more densely populated a species is, the more likely that disease could spread from one individual to another. Predation is influenced by how many organisms there are. So those are all density dependent. The factors that are considered density independent are things that are unrelated to the size of the population. So these are things like catastrophes, forest fires, drought, monsoon, toxins, pollutants, pH. Those are things that are not affected by how many organisms there are in the area, but they still affect how the population grows. When ecologists study populations, one of the important things that they look at is called the niche of various species. And niche is kind of a hard term to define. Niche, we sometimes define it as the role that a species plays in the ecosystem, and it includes lots of things about that species. It includes the geographic location where it lives, the amount of the type of food that it eats, when it's active, where it nests, where it lives. All those factors about the organism are its niche. And so if species have the same niche in the same area, then typically they're going to compete for resources. If we have 3 species of warblers and they all live in the same area, they all eat the same berries from the same tree, well, then they're going to compete for those resources. So overlapping niches mean competition is likely going to happen. But one strategy that species use when there is overlapping niches is what's called niche partitioning. When basically each species will take on a slightly different role in that ecosystem. The warblers that are listed here, they do that by each species feeding in a different part of the tree. Okay? The Blackburnian warbler feeds in the top parts of the tree, whereas the bay-breasted warbler will feed in the middle sections, and then the myrtle warbler feed down lower. So by sort of taking a smaller niche than they otherwise would utilize, they're avoiding competition with each other. And often if we have 2 species with the same niche competing, if one is a much stronger competitor, it might sort of overtake and make it so the other one can't exist in that ecosystem. Or it might shift the niche of the weaker competitor so that it no longer overlaps. When we're looking at an ecosystem, one of the most important factors to understand is how energy flows through the ecosystem. And this is pretty much all review for you guys. You've heard all these terms before, and I would guess you know almost all of them. So just quickly, autotrophs are producers, things that use photosynthesis. They make their own food, things like plants, algae, plankton. Heterotrophs are consumers. They need to eat other organisms in order to get the energy that they need. And we classify consumers different ways. We have herbivores that eat only plants, carnivores that eat only animals, and omnivores which eat both. We also have decomposers, also called saprophytes. They break down organic matter and waste, okay, dead organisms, kind of act as the recyclers of the ecosystem. And also there is a special type of decomposer called the detritivore. They feed on the remains of dead plants and animals, things like worms, flies, maggots, things like that. So when we are studying the flow of energy in an ecosystem, we often will look at food chain. And a food chain basically shows how energy moves through an ecosystem from one organism to another to another. It's a simple diagram that shows a direct line of what eats what. So we have the maple tree, which is eaten by the beetle, which is eaten by the frog, which is eaten by the snake. Or the dandelion eaten by the snail, eaten by the sparrow, by the hawk. Or a little longer food chain, but still one organism directly to another. And so each of these levels is called a trophic level. So the producers are always at the base. They're at the first trophic level. And then the consumers go up from there. If we take some food chains and interconnect them, we could form food webs. A food web shows a more complex picture of an ecosystem, because typically organisms don't just consume one other type of prey, they consume multiple parts, and a food web can show us that relationship. We can pick out from a food web individual food chains, like the phytoplankton to the benthic invertebrates to the sea ducks to the bald eagle. That's one food chain that could be found in this food web. And what we often find in ecosystems in which there's a predator-prey relationship is sort of this classic pattern followed by the population of the predator and the population of the prey. This is a famous study of a snowshoe hare, like a rabbit, and a lynx, which is like a bobcat. And this experiment done in the 1930s, they plotted the population of these organisms. And what they found over this period of time is that there was a pattern that was followed, sort of oscillated in these cyclical ways. So let's look at the solid line represents the hare population. Okay? And you could see that over this period of time, almost 100 years, the hare population went up and down. And if you look at the lynx population, it also went up and down. Now what's the pattern? Can anyone notice how these populations are related? Brian?
As the hare population goes up, so is the lynx. And as it goes down, so is the feathers.
Yeah. Are they in sync?
No.
No, they're offset by a small amount, which makes sense, that the populations don't respond instantly. So look at this first peak in the hare population. So as the hare population reaches this peak, slightly after that, what's happening to the lynx? It's going up. Because again, as the hare population rises, that means more prey for the lynx, and therefore the population can grow. But as the lynx population grows, what effect does that have on the hare population? Yeah, it decreases it. And so then the hare population starts to decrease. But now that we have fewer hares, what happens with the lynx? They don't have enough food, so their population drops. And now there's fewer predators, so what happens to the hare again? They start rising. So we have this oscillation of increasing predator and prey, slightly offset. These two populations have a very strong influence on each other. So in all ecosystems, where does the energy come from? It starts from the sun. The main source of energy for the Earth's ecosystems are the sun, is the sun. And so only one type of organism can actually harness that energy. Plants, producers, autotrophs. And so autotrophs can use the sun's energy along with carbon dioxide and water, and they can take that energy and transform it into glucose and other compounds. Herbivores can get their energy by eating the plants, carnivores eat the herbivores, and so forth. And so we have this flow of energy through the ecosystem. Now, an important thing to note is that energy is not recycled in an ecosystem. It comes in from the sun, goes from one organism to another, but it doesn't get recycled. We're going to study materials later, and materials like nitrogen or water or oxygen, they are recycled within the ecosystem. So each time energy is transferred from one organism to another, about 90% of it gets used up. And we already talked earlier today about where that goes. What does that energy go towards? Movement. What else? Respiration. Heat. Yeah. So all of those waste, digested waste. Yeah. So 90% of the energy that an organism eats goes into those things. Only about 10% goes into making the organism grow larger, into more biomass. And so because of that, with each trophic level, there's less and less energy available. And so we draw these diagrams called energy pyramids that give us a visual representation of that. So if I look, say the courtyard ecosystem today, if I were to look at three species, let's say I have the grass, I have some grasshoppers that eat the grass, and then some robins in the trees that eat the grasshoppers. If I were to gather up all of the grass, all of the robins, all of the grasshoppers, and find its mass, which would have the greatest mass? Yeah, definitely the grass. What would be next? Grasshoppers, and the least amount of mass? The robins. And we always find this relationship in ecosystems. There's always the most mass in the producers because they are harnessing the sun's energy. Each additional step up the trophic chain you go, energy is being lost. Out of all the energy coming into the sun, the plants can use it. And then the herbivores that eat those plants, they only gain about 10%. And then the carnivores that eat them only gain about 10%, and so forth. There's always the least amount of the top carnivores. And that should make sense because, if you think about top carnivores in ecosystem, a shark, a bald eagle, a lion, big trout. There's not lots of those top predators around. You don't see flocks of bald eagles flying through the sky. You don't see herds of lions running through the savannas. You don't see a whole school of sharks in the ocean. There's just not many of those top predators because there's only a limited amount of energy that can reach those top trophic levels. And so you see here some examples. These are called energy pyramids. They show the relative amount of energy at each trophic level. It's always the largest with the producers, and then at each level up, there's fewer and fewer, a lower and lower amount of energy to support those organisms. And this relates back to what we were talking about before in terms of human consumption. At the lower on the food chain a person can eat, right, the less resources that have to be put into making that food. Okay, our last slide here today. So we can use some information we know about the species in an ecosystem to sort of calculate and to help us understand some of this. So in this top example is relatively simple. You have a 120-pound deer, which eats about 2,500 pounds of leaves each year. And you have a lion, 150-pound lion, eats about 25 deer a year. So first, calculate. How many pounds of deer does it take to feed that lion in a single year? Let me know when you have an answer.
3,000.
How much?
3,000.
3,000 pounds of deer to support that lion. So, to support those deer, we need all those leaves. So how many pounds of leaves does it take to support a single lion?
We would be on the top of 7 million 500.
So how many pounds of leaves does it take to support the lion? Do we have a number?
Some million.
62,500 pounds of leaves. So 2,500 pounds of leaves per deer, 25 deer per lion equals 62,000 pounds of leaves per lion. So again, what you see is it takes a huge amount of producers to support just that single lion. And if we added another step in this food chain, that number would get even higher. Let's do one more example. So you have a humpback whale that eats 5,000 herring per day. A herring eats 7,000 shrimp per day. A shrimp eats 130,000 diatoms per day. Diatoms are little microscopic producers. So how many diatoms are required to support a single whale?
Ooh, I don't know.
You have to go to scientific notation, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a.
1,720,000.
So do you know what science, have you guys learned that? Do you know what it means? 4.55. What does that mean? What does E mean?
12 0.
Times 10 to the, what is it, 12 power? Yeah. 4.55 times 10 to the 12. Yeah. So that's a lot to support that whale. And that's why we don't see 25 whales, okay, all in one concentrated area. A single whale needs a large volume of the ocean to provide enough energy to support it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of us, and we probably need a ton of energy.
We do.
for us.
Yeah, we require a lot of energy. Any questions?